Yo, what's up, live stream? Hey, this is Richard Chancey with richardchancey.com, and I wanted to talk to you today about the one thing you need to do to sell more. I hear gurus all the time talking about their businesses, talking about their sales funnel, saying, well, there's not really one thing that you need to do to sell more. In reality, there is. There is one thing that you need to do. Now, my one thing is not going to shock you if you've watched any of my videos. The one thing that I do is I run Facebook ads to webinar opt-in pages because we sell just about everything through a webinar. And if you want to check out exactly how we do that, join me for my next training. It's called Advanced Webinar Systems. You can find a link to that in the description here, or just go to webinarwebinar.com and sign up. And yes, I know it's a hokey name for a URL, but it was available. And it's actually a webinar about how to do webinars. So thus the webinarwebinar.com. So let's talk about the one thing real quick. There are really not just there's not just one thing that you can do to sell more in your business. But as you begin to progress through your sales funnel and taking maybe a traditional sales funnel online, I think it makes a lot of sense to sit down at least weekly, if not every single day, and say, you know, based on where I'm trying to go, what is the single most important thing that I need to do today? Now, let me back way up. In about 2009, and if you were in business then, you know the economy absolutely sucked in 2009. I went to work for a church construction company. So went to work in a really small market, selling to churches, selling construction, which nobody was doing in 2009. And they basically gave me a phone book and said, hey, sit down, start calling churches. So 320,000 churches in America, 6% of those are growing. At any given time, 10% of those 6% that are growing might be having a conversation about building a building. Okay, that breaks down to about 1,800 churches out of 300,000 that I needed to be able to find, build a relationship with, and put them through an 18-month sales cycle. Now, if I've just stepped right into your pain because you're selling high-ticket consulting or coaching and you have a long sales cycle, then hey, guess what? I feel you. I know what you're going through. So what I did is I took a step back from it and I said, okay, who's doing really well in this area? Who's in this market that's a thought leader that's actually attracting people to them? And the answer was nobody, which may be the case in your industry too. Let me just tell you, it's absolutely the case in your industry if you niche down far enough. And so when I looked at that industry, which is not a big industry, church construction, I realized there were no thought leaders. Now, eventually I realized that I didn't just want to be a thought leader. I wanted to be able to get people to leverage this season for their organization because I cared about the people I was doing business with. And I even niched farther from that group of people that wanted to build buildings and became an expert in renovating buildings for churches, which is a whole nother conversation. Here's what you need to know about that. I realized very quickly I needed to get people calling me because you're positioned as an expert when people are picking up the phone and calling you. You are not positioned as an expert when you're picking up the phone and calling somebody else. Are you with me? Okay, so I realized that I needed to be able to attract people in my direction. I started blogging a little bit, created a couple of videos, and then a friend of mine said, hey, you really should think about a webinar where and this is the words he used, where you can get people on a training and scare them to death about the process they're about to go through. So that's what I did. I created a webinar around church construction and told them all the scary things that could happen during that time. And the call to action in that webinar was to take the next step and call me. Hey, I outline every single bit of this in my Advanced Webinar Systems training. Just go to www.webinarwebinar.com and sign up for it now. If you think that you can't sell with webinars in your business, I'll promise you, I sold a $7 million church construction project using a webinar as the first step in the process. Didn't sell the project with a webinar, but I absolutely sold the next step, and I cover that in the training. So here's the big picture. When people ask me what the one thing I need to do in my business to be successful is, you know what the answer today is? Is to run Facebook ads to a webinar opt-in. Hey, guess what you're doing right now? You're watching a webinar ad that leads to an opt-in for a webinar, or a Facebook ad that leads to an opt-in for a webinar. Man, I wanted that to be more dramatic than that. Here's the bottom line. Every single day when I wake up, I know that me and my team, we're going to do one thing really well. We're going to run ads that drive people into high quality training. Now, the cool thing about my business is it's evolved over the last 7 or 8 years. And instead of just doing that one simple thing, running Facebook ads to webinar opt-in pages, now I get to do it for a bunch of different people and a bunch of different organizations. In fact, we come into those organizations and build an entire business model on top of sometimes traditional products and services to be able to generate leads at a profit using webinars and digital products and those kind of things. So the bottom line is this. Today, you need to wake up and think through, what's the one thing that I need to do that's going to make everything else I'm doing either easier or unnecessary? And for me, selling high-ticket consulting, that one thing was building a webinar. And now that I've got webinars that we know work, they educate our clients, they get us on the phone with people that know what we do and they're asking about it. Now the one thing we need to do is run Facebook ads to those funnels. Okay, I hope you found that super helpful. If you're selling high-ticket coaching and consulting and I waste your time, you can call me and leave me a nasty voicemail or send me an email and say, hey, you're full of it. I do some serious training in this. My whole philosophy about training people on webinars is 90% of the people that show up for my webinar are not ready to take the next step with me. They still need to have a moment of huge impact because that is my personal brand. My personal brand in the marketplace isn't just with the people that buy, because we know we've got great stuff coming behind that. My personal brand in the marketplace is with people who aren't yet ready to take the next step but need some solid education to get them to break through so that they can take the next step. Okay? If that sounds interesting to you, I'll see you in the training. Thanks.